Hi, Dr. Jim Dittmar here, and this morning or today or this evening, whenever you're watching this, I want to spend a little time talking about a topic that comes up regularly in the discussions regarding leadership and management, and no matter what the context might be, but certainly in the MSLS program, that's one issue that we address. And it is this. Is there a difference between leadership and management? Are they the same? Are they different? And so let me just share with you a few ideas that from some of the materials that you'll be reading, just to give you a bit of a setup for this conversation. By the way, I should say that there are some authors who have written in this field, others that have studied in this field, who say really there isn't any difference. It's a matter of semantics. They use the word interchangeably. But again, I think it all comes down to how do you define leadership? How do you define management? And often students are left with the conclusion that, in fact, there is a difference between the two in terms of how we describe them, how we understand them. We don't look at them as one being better than the other. We don't say that, leadership is sort of the preferred methodology or the preferred approach to working in organizations, and management is somehow some sort of bad, terrible, awful way of dealing with things. In fact, most authors will say that we need both. We need both leadership and management in order to properly run an organization, in order to be able to achieve organizational goals. You need both. Some authors will argue that they are two different kinds of people. You can't be a leader and a manager. It's one or the other. Others say, no, you can certainly have in one individual the ability to both lead and to manage, again, in terms of how it's defined in those different roles. So it's a controversial topic to some. To others, it is not. And to many of our students, it is an interesting insight that they gain. Let me start by reading to you from an author that you should have already read and be familiar with, Joseph Rost, his book on organizational leadership, Leadership for the 21st Century. And you may recall that I talked about the idea that his emphasis was on leadership as an influence relationship among people, among leaders and followers who intend real change according to a mutual purpose. And so it sounds like a very collaborative, very interactive, very two-way kind of process. And his belief is that when you see this going on, those four elements, you're seeing leadership. And so it's interesting that then he, in his next chapter, talks about leadership and management. And let me give you the definition that he presents to us for management and see if you can understand the difference in his thinking. Here's how he defines management. Management is an authority relationship between at least one manager and one subordinate who coordinate their activities to produce and sell goods and or services. Now contrast that to his definition of leadership, where he talks about leadership is an influence relationship, not an authority relationship. And then he says between leaders and followers, and in this case he says one manager and one subordinate. And the next part of the leadership definition, who intend real change. And here we see who coordinate their activities. And then for what purpose is leadership? To intend real change according to their mutual purpose. And here it's coordinating activities to produce and sell particular goods and or services. So you can see that there's quite a difference between the two. And again, Joe Rost would not in any way indict management as some lower level kind of evil, unethical kind of process. He would argue that if done properly, it's very necessary. You need that kind of organization in order for a firm, a corporation, a company to thrive, just as you need to have leadership occurring as well. So again, get that point of view. Now, according to Rost, he would say, yeah, they are two different things, very much so. And you remember that what he does set out to say and make very clear in his discussion of leadership is that for most of the authors and the people who he reviewed in writing his book, they confused leadership with good management in the industrial paradigm. And now he says we are in a post-industrial paradigm, a time when we have much fewer of the factories and much fewer of the types of organizations that needed to be hierarchical and top-down. And so we need this new idea of leadership. So in the new paradigm, leadership is what he calls, how he defines it. But he talks about the fact that in many cases people confuse leadership. It's just good management in the industrial paradigm. And so one last comment here. He doesn't disparage management. He thinks it's necessary. The definition makes it very clear it's different. There's some other authors that you're going to read. You're going to read an article by John Kotter, What Leaders Really Do. And as you read that article, you'll see that leaders cope with change, whereas management copes with complexity. Again, you can get a bit of the similar kind of emphasis there as Rost might have with the emphasis on leadership with change. But coping with complexity is about dealing with the issues of the organization in terms of processes and structures, policies, all the things that have to be in place in order to kind of bring this complex operation into a certain equilibrium that will function, that will work, that will actually accomplish. If all we're doing is leading, coping with change, and we're not doing these other kinds of things, that's problematic. Leadership, he says, sets a direction. It develops vision, strategies for change. But what does the manager do? What does management do? It sets the targets or goals. It establishes the steps, and it allocates resources for what? To achieve that vision, to make sure that those strategies for change are appropriately implemented. He also says that leadership is about aligning people. It's about communicating the vision to people so that people are aligned with that internally. They are motivated. They are committed. They challenge people in terms of believe this message, believe this vision. Do you want to be part of this vision? Do you want to be part of this organization? They they empower, an overused phrase sometimes, but they release people in order for them to be part of that vision achievement and that alignment. On the other hand, management is about organizing and staffing. So rather than aligning people with vision and mission, management's role is to get the people in the organization in the first place, creating a structure, creating the jobs, making sure that qualified people are being hired, and delegating responsibility, devising systems that monitor implementation of the things that people are trying to accomplish visionarily. Again, you see some distinction there. And then finally, the leader is about motivating and inspiring people. I kind of gave you that, a hint of that before. This alignment process is about motivating and inspiring, keeping people on track, continuing to appeal to the passion and emotions of people that this is worth it. This is something we ought to be doing. And managers, on the other hand, are controlling and problem solving. They're monitoring, how are we doing? They're identifying places where we don't achieve and what's the problem, what's the issue there, and then plan and organize to solve those problems. So you get a bit of the difference there where the leader, according to Kotter, is much more in the notion of envisioning, much more in the dealing with change. What's going on out there? How is our organization being affected? Kind of what you might call the bigger picture view. Whereas the manager or management in an organization like that is dealing with much more the particulars, the implementation, the ability to make that vision a reality. And so you'll deal with that. You'll see that in the reading. Now there's one last article, and I'll just spend just a short moment or two talking to you about it. It's probably the one that's the least clear sometimes in what what the author's trying to say. It's not that he doesn't write well. It's just that the ideas that he's dealing with aren't quite as cut and dry as say Rost or Cotter. And that's Abraham Zalesnik. Managers and leaders, are they different? And this was a really significant article when it first appeared in the Harvard Business Review. By the way, Cotter's article also did later on. But Zalesnik's approach is not so much about the tasks or the roles or the responsibilities of the leader or the manager, but more about the people themselves. Who are managers as people, and who are leaders as people? And so here's a few of the differences. And again, it raised a bit of a ruckus. There were quite a bit of people who pushed back on his ideas, but he hung tough and continued to advocate for this sort of leaders and managers as different kind of people. Let me just give you a few. Leaders tolerate chaos and lack of structure, and they're very active instead of reacting, that kind of person. Managers seek order and rationality and control. Leaders shape ideas instead of responding to them, whereas managers are problem solvers. Leaders develop fresh approaches to long-standing problems. They think differently about issues that they've been dealing with for some time. Managers, on the other hand, aim towards solutions that are compromises among conflicting values. And there's a whole list of things here that Zalesnik lists as, characteristics of the manager, characteristics of the leader. And one that's kind of interesting, I think, is that the leaders, he says, feel separate from their environment. They are people that are kind of, in some ways, withdrawn and isolated because of the type of work they have to do and the kind of person they are as a result. And managers, on the other hand, personally identify with the existing order of affairs. That is, they're much more connected to the day-to-day. They feel that. So again, a few of the several differences that Zalesnik points out, and remember, his piece is that the people are different. Managers and leaders are different kinds of people by their very personality. And then this was a book, just to give you an example of an author who doesn't see the difference. A guy named Gary Uckel, who has written a book that's been updated, new editions, many, many times, so we no longer use the text. But he says this: the term leader, manager, and boss are used interchangeably in this book to indicate people who occupy positions in which they are expected to perform the leadership role, but without any assumption that leadership processes actually occur. And then he says, some theorists have advocated that leading and managing should be treated as separate processes. This distinction seems simplistic and unnecessary. So just to let you know, there's people like Gary Uckel who have written a great deal in this world who say, I don't see the difference, and calls it simplistic and unnecessary. So keep in mind that as you work through MSLS and these ideas during the first course, History and Theory of Leadership, that this idea of leaders and managers being different is a theme. And it all comes down to, how are we defining leadership? What's your definition? And how do you define management then? Are they different in that respect? And unless you start out with that understanding of how you're defining leadership, what your concept is, it's difficult to answer that question. But it is an interesting conversation that students have during this first course, and they tend to, and I'm not trying to pack the court here on one side or the other, but they do tend to believe that in fact there are differences, Again, not necessarily that management is negative. It's somehow a lesser of two very important actions that have to take place in an organization, but they are both needed and necessary. So, hope this has been a helpful intro to this concept as you read the articles, and it'll be a setup for you as you try to make sense for yourself, this debate. Is there a difference between leadership and management? Thank you.